Good morning. It's a treat to look at my screen and see you here for the start of book 2. And again, I want to thank each of you for participating. It gives me much motivation and satisfaction in being able to share the Psalms with you. This morning is Rosh Chodesh Av, the beginning of a new month on the Hebrew calendar, a month identified with sadness, particularly the beginning of Av, for on the 9th of Av, according to the Talmud, both the first and the second temples were destroyed. And on the evening of the 9th of Av, it's traditional to read the Book of Lamentations and to recall the destruction of the temple, and to do so as if, for much of that book of Eicha, as if Jerusalem is given voice and in human-like ways longs for her children's return. Psalm 42 and Psalm 43 this morning are the classic psalms for longing for the temple. And so it feels like more than coincidence that as we mark Rosh Chodesh Av, we do so with words that for instance, Meiri, a rabbi of the 16th century, would say this specific psalm embodies the feelings of exile and longing. I changed the title of Psalm 42 slightly in that in preparing it, not fully, but mostly, I identified with this as a Levite in exile. And so my original title and my letter of introduction said, "So many questions as my spirit in exile thirsts." And I crossed out "in exile." For although this is clearly a psalm, both 42 and 43, that are about the longing for the temple, and clearly written by somebody who found the temple a sacred center, it's not clear when and who wrote it. Some would say, for instance, in a classic mode, that it was written by David, but as you recall, the temple wasn't built by David. It was built by Solomon, and so that's a tension. Others would say it was written after the exile, but we tend to think of the Psalms as having been composed before 586, during the time of the first temple, though it's not certain, and it's possible that it was written later, because clearly things weren't codified till later, which brings me to my surmise, which is this could have been written in exile, but as likely, if not more, was written by a Levite, a member of the choir, during the time of the temple. And for some reason, this particular Levite feels at a distance from that place of worship. Here are the things that characterize the psalm. First is the repetition of questions. In Psalm 42, which is 12 verses, there are 7 questions. Why, where, and what, which is often translated as why and where and what. And in Psalm 43, 4 times. It's a shorter psalm, only 5 verses and 4 questions. So the first thing is questions repeatedly define a inner, and here's the second part, these questions seem to be internal. The Psalter is wrestling with his nephesh, with his spirit. That word spirit in Psalm 42 gets repeated 4 times and will be repeated also in Psalm 43. This is an internal dialogue. There is an enemy, as is the nature of our Psalms. And here, what is repeated is the enemy's taunt. Where is your God? Which will be repeated twice in Psalm 42 and will be suggested as the context for Psalm 43. There will be one verse, one phrase, repeated 3 times. Why are you downcast, my spirit, and why so stirred up within me? So in sum, to pull together who's writing this psalm and what is the general tenor, it's written by a Levite. It's written by somebody with a strong attachment to the temple and a longing for the temple, and thereby a longing for God. That word face of God or face will also be reoccurring 4 times in Psalm 42. Last comment, and then I'll read 42 and 43. And that is, this morning, as we begin the second of the 5 books, I have brought together Psalm 42 and 43. It has a long history of doing so. So even classic commentators, I mentioned the Meiri before, of the 16th century, he will see these 2 psalms as linked. Radak, David Kimchi, a little earlier in Spain, will see 43 as a continuation as well. And here's why. Psalm 43, very short, only 5 verses, does not have an introduction, which is the normative. Like in this case, we're going to see this is a psalm of the sons of Korach. But Psalm 43 doesn't have an introduction at all, which is an anomaly. Secondly, the words and the theme are repeated. Literally, there are entire phrases of Psalm 42 that get repeated in Psalm 43. Particularly noteworthy is that the final verse of Psalm 43 will be bringing together phrases that are from different verses in Psalm 42. Hence, it feels like pulling together the words. And last, as the first of Book 2, I noted yesterday, this psalm is written by the sons of Korach. Korach had 3 sons, and this isn't his sons necessarily, but it's already in the first book of Chronicles, chapter 25, a list of the Levites who were the chorus. And one of those choral members is a descendant of Korach, and he's identified as having 3 sons. So this is in the chain of the family of Korach, Levite choir singers. Let me begin. And I'm going to read straight through Psalm 42 and 43, come back and do a little bit of analysis, and am looking forward to some of your reactions, particularly on, again, the opening day of Av, your own sense of the longings.
Psalm. Want to put it on the screen?
Mimi, you are there every day to help remind me. So let me, Eric, you have to redirect me in order to post.
Go ahead.
Okay. So first. One second. Verse Psalm 42. For the conductor, a maskil of the sons of Korach, as a gazelle pants after the springs of water, so my spirit pants after you, O God. My spirit thirsts for God, for the living deity. When will I come and appear at the face of God? My tears are to me my bread, day and night, while they say to me all the day, Aye Elohecha, where is your God? These things I remember and pour out within me my spirit. For I moved with the throng, walking mindfully to the house of God, with the voice of joy and praise, a multitude, keeping holy day. Why so downcast my spirit? Why so stirred up within me? Hope in God, for I will yet acclaim for the deliverance of God's countenance. O my God, within me my spirit is downcast. Therefore do I remember you from the land of Jordan and the Hermons, from the mount of Mitzar. Depths call to depths. At the roar of your channels, at your breakers and your waves, within me they have passed. By day, Adonai will command kindness, and by night, God's song will be with me. A prayer to the deity of my life. I will say to the deity, my rock, why have you forgotten me? Why do I go in gloom under the oppression of the enemy, as murder in my bones or the taunts of my foes, when they say to me all day long, Aye Elohecha, where is your God? Why so downcast my spirit, and why so stirred up within me? Have hope in God, for I will yet praise God, the deliverance of my countenance and my God. Let me first analyze Psalm 42, and then we'll look at 43. The first thing to note, it's important, is how this psalm's yearnings have found their way into our liturgy. Particularly verse 2 at the beginning. As a gazelle pants after the springs of water. That image of a gazelle is in Yedid Nefesh on Friday night when we chant, Yarutz avdecha kamo ayil. Would that I run like a gazelle and bow before your beauty. And that image of bowing is also here in verse 6. The phrase that we get, why so downcast my spirit, why so stirred up within me, matish tochavi umatehemi, is part of Lechadodi. When we chant, Lo tevoshi velo tikalmi, you shall not be embarrassed, you shall not be ashamed. Ma tishtochachi umatehemi, why are you downcast? Why do you moan? Both of those prayers, Yedid Nefesh and Lechadodi, were written in Sfat, in exile, in the 16th century. And so this psalm, which is echoed in those longings, is a psalm about longing for redemption, or at least the return to the temple, which all the more in later Jewish life will be the symbol of redemption itself. And so those introductory psalms, all of Kabbalat Shabbat, the introductory collection of prayers on Friday night, are written and organized as psalms organized with these two hymns, Yedid Nefesh and Lechadodi, as the two non-psalms as part of Kabbalat Shabbat, echoing Psalm 42. My spirit thirsts for God, for the living deity, Le'el Chai. I like that expression, Le'el Chai, a living God, and the sense of wanting to encounter God in the fullness of life. There's the image of water in verse 2 in terms of thirst, and now a different kind of water in verse 4, and those are tears. Tears are to me my bread. Lechem, of course, in Hebrew is both bread, but can also be food, which is why we say the blessing for our meal over bread, because bread itself is seen as food. So it can be translated, my tears are to me my nutrition, day and night, while they say to me all the day, this taunt, where is your God? Now verse 5 is remembrance. He has this happy memory of pouring out his spirit while moving through the throng. Here in this case, pouring out his spirit is reversed. It's a positive. His spirit, his essence, his life was lived that he now brings to the foreground. And again, you can see the Psalter wrestling with himself. He's feeling this despair, a despair with the echo of both being taunted, where is your God? But also a sense of distance from God. And then back and forth to recalling and finding hope in the voice of joy and praise when he moved with the throngs, the multitude, keeping a holy day. Hamon Chogeg, which is also translated as with much celebration, but Chogeg or Chag is specifically in the Bible usually identified with the pilgrimage holidays and the temple. And now back to downcast. Ma tishtochachi nafshi. Why so downcast my spirit, so stirred within me? And sometimes the word tehemi is translated instead of stirred up, which it can be, like the word tehom, right? When in creation, God hovered over the depths, the sense of an inner depth or an inner stirring is often translated as moaned. So why so much moaning within me? And now he's again seesawing as he says to himself, hope in God, for I will yet acclaim the deliverance of God's countenance, God's face, God's presence. But I use the word countenance because of this physical quality, this immediacy of God. And now back to the seesaw. Oh my God, within me my spirit is downcast. And now back to double entendre, two possibilities. This could either be words of uplift or not. Therefore, I remember you from the land of Jordan, that's to the east. The Hermons, that's the north, the tall peaks and the Golan into Lebanon of the Hermon mountains. From the Mount of Mitzar, and Mitzar means a small mountain, literally. So this could be, the fancy term in poetry is a merism, M-E-R-I-S-M. It's like A to Z, right? It's two examples that define the larger whole. So I remember the land of Jordan, but I remember you from the tall mountains to the little mountains and all in between. And now a shift from heights to depths. Depths call to depths. The deep calls to deep. At the roar of your channels, all your breakers and your waves, within me they have passed. And the double entendre of verse 8 is he referring, as in verse 7, to the beauty of the oceans, the other side of Israel? Or is this an inner description of him drowning as the waters pass? And this is the third use of water. In the beginning, he's yearning for the rivulets. He's yearning for the springs. Then the water is tears. And here is this again, double possibility of acknowledging the beauty and majesty of the land of Israel to the oceans, or looking within and feeling overwhelmed as if awash in trouble. And here's another taste of hope. By day, Adonai will command kindness, and by night, God's song will be with me, a prayer to the deity of my life. I will say to the deity, my rock, but back to seesaw. Why have you forgotten me? So when I do meet God, this is what I'm going to say. Why do I go in gloom under the oppression of the enemy? And now it rises in terms of the depths of his pain as murder in my bone, beretzach ba'atzmotai, are the taunts of my foes when they say to me all day long, where is your God? And now he's repeating that phrase, Aye Elohecha, as if there are those who say to him, which again is why these were the words that so resonated for Jews in exile. For in Jewish history in exile, the taunt was, you've been exiled, where is your God? And Jews on this, the first day of Av, felt this longing for the land and for God to return. Verse 12, why so downcast my spirit, now getting repeated again? Why so stirred up within me? And now he's trying, he seesaws, have hope in God, for I will yet praise God, the deliverance of my countenance and my God. In some manuscripts, it's the deliverance toward his countenance, it's panav, but usually it's recorded the deliverance of my countenance, which flips it, which is I will make an appearance before God, my God. And now the next psalm, let me go and get Psalm 43, that shorter psalm. And the middle verse of Psalm 43 is what I chose as the title. Send forth your light and your truth. Grant me justice, God, and plead my plea against a nation without kindness. From an individual of deceit and wickedness, save me. For you are my God, my stronghold. Why have you rejected me? Why in gloom do I walk under the oppression of the enemy? Send forth your light and your truth. Let them lead me. Let them bring me to your holy mountain and to your dwelling place. Then I will come to the altar of God, to the deity of my happiness of exaltation, that I may praise you with the lyre of God, O God, my God. Why are you downcast, my spirit? And why so stirred up within me? Have hope in God, for I will yet praise God, the deliverance of my countenance and my God. And so you see, in the final verse, there is a repetition of what was previously in verses 6 and 12 of Psalm 42, which was the middle verse, and the final verse is now the final verse again. And there's a shift, though subtle. Here, in its opening, it's the Psalter saying, grant me justice, God, for their taunts are unjust. Or if you will, my exile is unjust. They are wicked. And here is this word, plea against a nation without kindness. The word chassid often is translated in some of the translations as covenantal loving kindness, as if in the Bible, chesed is only used in the context of both a relationship with God and loving kindness, which is to say they have, this nation, they are without kindness, meaning more than just kindness, they are without a relationship with you, a covenantal bond, unlike me, unlike my nation. And this can again be read not as simply the plea of an individual, but a national plea. And we will see in the second book, more than in the first, a greater sense of the songs of a nation, not just the Psalter. And in the middle of this Psalm 43, something else additional. Send forth your light and your truth, which is often understood as if God's light and God's truth, they will lead the nation. They will be like angels. Light and truth. Now, moving away from that metaphor of angels, is what God offers as hope and as direction to return to the holy mountain, to God's dwelling place. And verse 4, I will play the lyre. So great will be my joy that I will have the need to sing to you your praises. So this is clearly written by somebody who is a musician, who is one of those Levitical choir members who plays the string instrument and will sing God's praises. And it concludes with that common thread, now for the third time. Why are you downcast, my spirit? Because he's talking now to himself. And why so stirred up within me? Why do you moan within me? Have hope in God, for I will yet praise God, the deliverance of my countenance and my God. And so this is ultimately a psalm of hope, a song of feeling taunted. You get that same taunt by reversal, where Elijah taunts the prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel. Where is your God? When the fire from heaven doesn't appear to accept their offering. And somehow that rivalry between the God of Israel and the foreign gods, if you will, the false gods, echoes here as well as a psalm of exile, a psalm of competition of who does God love, who is the God worthy of worship. So that in sum, Psalm 42 and 43, entitled on my part, So Many Questions as My Spirit Thirsts, and then Let Your Light and Truth Lead Me, is a psalm of many, many internal wrestlings, questions, a going back and forth between despair, fueled by a longing for a memory, that of the temple, and the taunts of an enemy, and yet a hope that God in truth and as light will return the Psalter to the mountain, to the temple, to the place of unity, and where there is indeed seeing God's face and feeling God's presence. So with that, let me stop. I hope that you found this beginning of Psalm 2 particularly appropriate for the first day of Av. What are some of your questions or reactions? Arnold, go ahead, and then Ahuva.
It's not clear to me whether the enemies he speaks of are external enemies, that is the captors, or internal enemies, his compatriots, the Israelites who have been exiled and who have lost faith, have, God didn't protect us in Judea. Where is your God? It's not clear.
So I want to highlight the ambiguity that Arnold points to, which is it's not clear if this Psalter is speaking of the enemy as the non-Israelite, or is those who are among the people who have said God isn't there. Because that was part of exile too, that sense of there is no reason to yearn for that God who sent us into exile. And the third possibility, which is it may be his own inner struggle. And so there's within himself the voice of doubt in God that is being wrestled by the words of hope. All three are possible, which is the nature of poetry, which is more than one possible wrestling going on. Ahuva, did you begin to move your hand up? Yes, go ahead, Ahuva. Thank you, Arnold. You got to unmute yourself, Ahuva. Okay, go ahead, Ahuva.
Yesterday we had a guy from England who talked to us about how the Jews responded to catastrophes.
Yes.
And he talked about the two waves of exiles after the destruction of the first temple. In the first exile, the Babylonians took away the top leadership of Israel, and they did not destroy the temple yet. And it seems to me that this Levite is one of the first exiled, because he's not talking about, I would like to go back to Jerusalem, to the temple and rebuild it. He said Jerusalem is still there, the temple is still there, the altar is still there. However, he wants to go back to his job of choir, singing, sacrifice, and all this. So I think I'm putting him at that period of between the first exile and the second exile.
Well, I gained from that description by focusing me on a particular moment that this seems well suited for in terms of its origin, meaning first temple, as you describe it, Ahuva, when leadership, Levite, choir, is exiled, but the temple still stands. And that Levite is yearning to return and return to the temple, return to praising God, return to normalcy. That's a distinct possibility and a lovely bringing together of different learnings.
And there's more than that, if I may.
Yes.
He wants to come back, and the question is why my soul is so downcast.
Yes.
It's because he says in his dreams, he's dreaming for something that was so stirring the nation, the nefesh. He has hope.
Yes.
And he's very happy in his dreams, in his hopes. And he wonders why he doesn't feel so elated while he is in this mood of elation and hope. And I think that is why he's asking these questions. I should be hopeful, I should be happy, why I'm still depressed.
And yet, there's also the acknowledgement that my tears are to me my bread day and night, while they say to me all the day, where is your God? So
it's always the question, Ayeh Elohecha, is always in the mouth of prophets when they say that when you go to exile, the nations around you who see you marching off to exile, they will say, Aye Elohecha. They will taunt you. So
Yes.
it's always in this context of the enemy taunting those people who are marching off.
So I'll add one more piece and then kind of pull this together. And that is when we mark Tisha B'Av, we will have certain dirges, and that will be Ella Askara. Part of the poetry will echo verse 5, these things I remember, which is to say, it's hard to know, though I do like your suggestion, Ahuva, as to when it was written. Regardless of when it was written, and there are distinct possibilities. What is clear is that 42 and 43 will be the psalm of yearning for return to the temple. They will be the national yearning song. And on Tisha B'Av, we will have dirges that will contain that verse 5, Ella Askara. And every Friday night, as we long for Shabbat as the symbol of redemption, we will be echoing the words also of this psalm, saying, God, don't let my spirit be downcast. Why are you so stirred up? Because ultimately, as Ahuva emphasized, this is also a psalm of hope and of yearning, with the possibility that God, who is a judge, the beginning of verse 43, will grant justice and allow for light and truth of God to lead those exiles back to the Temple Mount. So I smiled to feel that this was a welcomed way to begin of a time in which we acknowledge the yearning of the Jewish people for the temple. As I invite anybody who would like to say Kaddish today to join with me. Eric, I'm going to ask you to post it as we conclude with the saying of Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
V'alma divra kirute v'yamlich malchute v'chayechonu v'yomechonu v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael ba'agalau v'zman kari v'imru amen.
Amen.
Yehei shmei Rabba mevorach le'olam u'me'omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal Shmei dekudei min kol berachata Tishbachata v'nechamata damiru yoma v'imru
Amen.
Yehei
Shlam
shlam
Amaya
v'chayim
aleinu v'yakol Israel Imru Amen.
Amen.
Oseh
Say
shalom
Shalom
Kodav Hu
Hu
ya'aseh
Ya'aseh
shalom
Shalom
Aleinu
Aleinu v'yakol Israel
Kol
Kol
Yoshvei
Yoshvei
Israel
Imru
V'imru
Amen.
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 Again, I want to remind everyone that there is no psalm tomorrow, which makes me doubly pleased we could do two today. Next Tuesday and Wednesday, we'll meet twice again next week when we'll pick up with Psalms 44 and 45. Thank you all. Have a good continued week. Be well.